Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Classroom to Corner Office Career Talks with Chris, a podcast designed to help you with the wild world of work, whether you are just entering the workforce out of college or considering a career change in your current journey. Today, I'm joined by Mark Carson, who is a director of compliance and logistics at Briar Ridge Auto. So, working in the trucking industry, for me, my father was a truck driver, so I definitely have a little bit of understanding of what that may entail on your end. Working with the people that are the day-to-day workforce there. So, Mark, appreciate you taking time to chat with me today.
Yeah, thanks. I'm happy to be here. Always a pleasure catching up with you anytime we get some time to see each other. So happy to jump on and talk a little bit about what we do over here.
Yeah, and for those that are watching on YouTube, front and center, or at least up and center, we got a Green Bay Packers flag
Oh, I
there.
could move a little bit and you can get my other Green Bay sign.
Yeah, Mark, the big Green Bay fan. I don't know
Very
if we've
cool.
had
Thank you.
anybody on there that would pledge that allegiance, so that's definitely interesting being from this area, right? This East Ohio, Ohio Valley area. So before we get into it, let's just get into this. Let's do something fun real quick.
Yeah.
What's the inspiration for the Green Bay Packers fandom?
The I get asked that all the time. If I could move a camera, I'd show you. I mean, my whole desk is covered in Green Bay Packers, from my keyboard, my mouse pad. I have a floating helmet, a frame of me and my daughter, and cheese heads, and even posters and pillows. But I just kind of lead it back to growing up. My brother was a huge 49ers fan, and the first football game I remember watching with him was Green Bay and San Francisco, and I couldn't root for the team my brother liked. And so I just felt like I had to roll with it. And the only other idea that I could come up with was that I grew up and my favorite color was green, and probably needed at some point to pick a team to root for. My parents not being sports fans, so I have to go with one of those two things that happened. But for some people that might be watching, I was not that person that jumped on the bandwagon back here in 2010 when they played the Steelers, and I just wanted to be that guy. I've been a Packers fan through and through for years, but exactly how I got there, I feel like that has to be the answer, because I don't know for sure.
It was that sibling rivalry. Can't
Yeah,
root for the same team. I want to be in that kind of that adversarial role with a brother. Who doesn't have that in their lives, right?
correct.
With a
Well, and
sibling.
there's 10 years separating my brother and I, so I feel like you've got to have a little bit of rivalry somewhere.
Perfect. Perfect. So, not that that directly leads into where you're at now, compliance and logistics, but right, let's get there. What does that mean, right? If there's somebody out there listening that's like compliance and logistics, like I may understand those terms, but how does that actually manifest itself in your day-to-day work?
Yeah, so I always joke. I said, when people ask me what do I do, I jokingly say I tell old men what to do every day. But no, true. I mean, really, it comes down to we move freight from point A to point B, and I keep the trucks compliant. So everything down from making sure registrations and things are kept in check. Following laws about weights of the vehicles, making sure maintenance is kept up. The paperwork side for the company on the logistics, and then really it's a lot of the fuel taxes and keeping track of all those things, lots of safety compliance that you have to keep up with, drug and alcohol compliance, random drug screenings, all those things. So a lot of it comes into play. I guess in a nutshell, what I do is make sure that my freight's on time, my trucks are safe to drive, and my drivers are safe to operate motor vehicles. That's really, in a nutshell, that's what I do every single day.
Yeah, and there's a lot that goes into that. Like you said, you boil it down very simply, but there is definitely a significant amount of work to keep the workforce, the company, and the other people on the road safe, right? You're protecting the people, the company, whether they work for you or driving for you all, or that are on the road with those that are driving your trucks. So yeah, definitely a lot that goes into that. I assume that you didn't wake up one day, when you were a teenager or maybe even in your early to mid 20s and say, you know what, I want to be a director of compliance and
No.
logistics in the trucking world. So how have you got to where you are now? And was this I just entered the industry and found this was my niche, or is this something that you had aspired to along?
Yeah, that's a great question. That it's funny, you've known me for a while, and so you probably know the world of which I emerged from before trucking. But I'm sure your listeners don't know me, or all of them, I'm sure, don't know me. But I actually came from the wedding and event world, and then but thinking back, I think it has a lot to do with it. Event planning and logistics planning really kind of go hand in hand. event from start to finish, point A to point B. And that's the same thing I'm doing here. But how I got into the trucking industry, I had left a job, and wanted something that was a little bit better hours at the time and a lot closer to home than what I was doing. So I became a dispatcher for sand trucks on gas and oil wells. And so really just a very small amount of what I'm doing right now, making sure paperwork was kept up and getting the sand to the proper gas and oil well. And then from there, I kind of just worked my way through that office and started to run their office. So I got a little bit more taste of what this job entailed. And then actually, the owner of the company of Briar Ridge approached me and wanted to see if I wanted to come here and start working. And at the time, there was another lady here that was doing what I'm doing now. Just started kind of taking little things away from her as we kind of moved through my experience here. And then I ended up back in this seat. And now there's a couple of us that work here in the office, myself, and then the owner's wife. We both work here in the office. She does a lot of the office side of things that I don't handle. She also does some things that have to do with the compliance and logistics as well. But her and I work really hand in hand. It's kind of a mixed bag of things that we both share. But that's really my process was coming in here was liking the trucking industry, starting in dispatching, and then just working my way up and just kept asking questions. Why do we do it this way? Why do we do it this way? And finding your own solutions. And it just became a fun puzzle to fix, to solve. And I really love the industry. It's a lot of fun. It changes every day, every year, every month as they get new regulations. And especially now into, leaning more into the automated driving trucks and things that are actually starting to emerge. So lots of changing times here, and it's always fun. Keeps you on your toes.
I'm sure, and yeah, especially with the automated trucks, cars, everything, right? Definitely going to revolutionize the industry at some point. At what
Yeah,
point, still yet to be determined. So you discussed a lot, right? A lot of little key pieces that I think are going to dive into here, especially as it relates to transferable skills in viewing, right, your roles that you had in wedding and event planning as an A to B kind of relationship, and how that kind of transitioned you in the thought of, oh, wait, we're just moving freight, right? We're planning events, right? We have to go from a starting point to a finishing point. As you entered into those entry level roles or those original roles or initial roles out of college, what do you think best prepared you in that event planning world? And what were some areas or at least some skills that you found that you had to learn on the job that may not have been something that you could have ever really received from a college education?
yeah. Another great one. Skills that you can't teach, no matter how hard anybody tells you can, are things like customer service. And you can you can always teach someone customer service, but you can't teach somebody that has to have a serviceable attitude. And so that's a really big thing. No matter what industry you work in, I don't care. It really doesn't matter. I mean, it's all customer service to a point, because now I'm not necessarily servicing, someone coming here to buy my product, but in a roundabout way, I am because I'm hauling somebody else's product. And if I'm not on time, that in turn really hurts their company, which again, in the grand scheme of things, is going to make me not a reliable trucking company. And so again, just having that customer service skill and communication, which you can teach communication, but unless you spend time and experience what is key communication in your industry, you'll never really be successful. But yeah, I mean, to answer the question, some skills that you have to learn firsthand, again, I think are going to be customer service. And that's the most important one that I learned all through my time. I learned it really importantly. It was June 15th, a couple years ago, when I had to tell a bride the day before her wedding that she could not have that wedding space. And those are some really interesting times of your career where you really have to learn, how do you keep a level head and really try to bring people back down to have those good conversations. So, I mean, the customer service is such an important integral skill in any industry, but I think, it's vitally important, especially in trucking.
Yeah, and things you don't want to mess with ever: people's money, people's kids, and people's weddings,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I
And
mean,
events generally.
yeah, and it's a problem solving skill as much as it's a customer service skill. I'm a huge believer, especially in my managerial style with any of my people here. It come to me with a solution, not a problem. I don't care. I don't have to like the solution that you propose. We can talk about that at a different time, but don't come to me with a laundry list of problems. Come to me with, hey, this is what happened. This is what I did to fix it. And if I don't like that, I'm not going to bite your head off, but I don't like coming in and having a pile of stuff on my desk that, is problems. Just come to me and tell me what you did, and we'll talk about it later. Again, if I don't like the solution.
Yeah, so we're coming from the event wedding planning world, which a lot of high stress, a lot of anxiety, I'm sure, right? Because you're working with other people's money in an event that they're probably seeing as, a hallmark, notable event of their lives. And you said you'd mentioned you made a little bit of a change, and it seemed like that was a work-life balance change, right? Hours and maybe some family involved there. How was that a challenge? Was that a challenging decision for you to make, right? Had you grown accustomed and enjoyed that industry and working with those people and were like, you know what, we just have to make this change, or is this means to an end?
Yeah, it was definitely a challenging change, especially uh, completely needing to feel like I needed to completely adapt to a new industry. But the more I spent time in there in trucking, I realized that it really isn't so different from event planning. Any of your listeners that spend time in event planning, you understand you need to know linen sizes and table sizes because they're not the same. You need to have a round linen, yes, is a round linen, but different sizes go to lap length or floor length. And I compare that a lot to just like filing my quarterly IFTA. I have to keep track of all those things, and it's information that I need to know right off the top of my head. Just like the legal weight, to drive a truck down the road, those things need to just be automatic. And it's all just those little industry niches. And, once kind of anybody that's making a large, a large change to a different industry, I spent some time and I was younger when I did it, but I tried to spend a lot of time finding out the similarities between event planning and trucking, and then just try to make it a smoother transition on myself and not such a culture shock when you sit down in a seat and do something completely different. Just spend that time and figure out how they're set, how they're similar. And I asked a ton of questions, a ton, to just people that I met on the street that, were in the same industry. I reached out to people on LinkedIn that I've searched their industry, the trucking industry, and just spent time asking questions. Really made the transition a little smoother on myself. Yeah, I mean, obviously wanting to do it for family, just wanted to be closer. I didn't like at the time my daughter was like 2, she's almost 5 now, and I just didn't like, the event industry or even hospitality in general. I'm sure you have listeners that are in the hospitality industry know it's not 9 to 5 Monday through Friday, weekends, holidays off. And it's Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, it's all the holidays, all the weekends. Those are your popular event times. And I just had to make a decision not to want to stay in that, and I found that trucking just kind of fell into my lap, and I guess I was good at it. So
Yeah, you were able to make those parallels, right? You said I try to find some similarities, whether it's identifying patterns or thinking that how this relates to, from event planning to trucking industry. And I think that's important, especially if people are looking to make a pivot or a change, is you understand what your strengths are as a person, as a worker. How do I translate this to a new industry or to a new company or to an organization? That's people that are looking to make a change. And even within the same industry, you can find those similarities and parallels. So one strategy that you shared is that ask a lot of questions, right? Curiosity is one thing that we can't teach. And sometimes it's awkward, and sometimes you may feel like I'm asking a stupid question, but especially in your situation, no question was a stupid question. It was just a curiosity to learn more. And I want you to maybe dive into that. Are there any situations that you recall that really helped inform you about more about the industry and about the day to day, or is this just the culmination of question after question after question that over time you just became more comfortable with the information and the knowledge?
yeah, I mean, it might seem cliche, but the biggest question was why. I was never afraid to ask that question because I hate the old adage that people always gave was, why do you do something this way? Well, we've always done it that way. Why? Why can't it? The biggest example I give is when I first came in here, and to Briar Ridge, the lady who was doing the IFTA at the time, or the quarterly reporting for fuel tax, is what IFTA is. So her reporting was on, and I'm not exaggerating, an 8.5 by 11 tablet sheet of paper. And it was probably 15 or 20 pages that she hand wrote. And I said, why do you do it this way? Well, because I've always done it that way, and that's how I learned how to do it. Well, I said, I'm not. I'm not gonna sit there and write 15, 20 pages of information and then try to sift through it. And when you hit the end of a quarter, you have 30 days to file for that previous quarter. And I said, I'm not gonna sift through this over the course of 2 weeks during that month to try and figure it out. And so I really just started clicking on the computer and figuring out the best way to do it. And I came up with a lot of ideas, and I feel like I was Thomas Edison to a point where I came up with 10,000 ways how not to file IFTA. But in the end, I actually wrote in a spreadsheet, I wrote a little bit of a code that I just type in some numbers and it populates everything out for me. When she was doing mileage, she was tracking mileage day by day by day by day for every one of our trucks. Well, at the time, we had 15 trucks. Well, you can imagine how many miles and those trucks are running every day. So I made a phone call to the company who does our mileage, and they're like, "Oh, you just have to click this button to get a detailed report of all the miles ran in every state." And I was like, "Perfect." So I pulled those up, and then again, so I mean, to make a long story short, just you keep asking why. Why do you do it this way? And just figure out a way to make it easier. I wasn't going to make my life miserable. I wouldn't give that kind of a work to anybody because I don't want to do it. So that was just a big thing to keep asking why. When trucks have a legal weight limit to run on the roads, why? Well, because it's safety. Why is that? Why that number? The same thing when you have gross vehicle weights. If it's over a certain amount, you can classify it as one. If it's a lower gross vehicle weight, classified as a different class of vehicle. Why? Why do those weights matter? So just really, honing in, and why is the biggest question. And a lot of people are afraid to ask it, especially to people who are in the industry, any industry, because they think it looks like you're weak or you don't know what you're doing, or some pushback with people who have been in there for 20, 30, 40 years. I remember going to a trucking show, the Matt's Trucking Show down in Kentucky a couple of years ago, and asking some of these guys who are CEOs of FedEx and things, and why do you do things this way? And they love answering those kinds of questions because a lot of people my age really aren't in the seat like this. It's people who are 10, 15 years my senior and have been in the industry, really pounding pavement for a long time. I'm really lucky. I know we're a small company, but I am really fortunate to be in this seat. And I like to think I don't take that for granted, but I also like to think it's because I spent the time to ask why and came up with solutions and not problems and let them figure it out.
Yeah, that's really important, right? Asking those questions, learning more, and then digging into it, right? Not just accepting like the response to why as the end point. That was really the starting point, and you use that to kind of catapult you into finding efficiencies and some automation opportunities, which I am sure have freed up time for you to explore other projects and find other ways to, whether it's to save the company money, whether that's to, move on to the next project, or um, you know, weekly, daily, monthly, um, whether that's a batch run of information, and continue to save time in the long way, which is a way for everybody that's listening to make you be an indispensable employee. All right, continue to find efficiencies, and some people I think have that kind of protectionist stance of, if I continue to do this, I'm working my way out of a job. But I like to think of it in the positive way of, I'm working my way, showing my value for the next step if that is available to me. So I
And
think
I
that
always,
that shows a lot.
to what you just said, and I've said this to the owners of our company. I said, I hope one day I do a good enough job that you don't need me. Because to me, that's when anybody at any level of their job has done an amazing job, is when you've done so good that the company can run without you and then you move on to something different. Do I think that we're close to that time here? I don't, but I do hope for the day that I'm no longer needed in this seat. I love this job. I love this company, love the people I work for. But at the end of the day, I think that's what everybody's goal should be in your industry, is to work yourself out of a job, not in a negative way, but to have done it so well to make the changes where the people below you are almost automatic, and your job doesn't, you're not a pertinent piece of the puzzle anymore. And then you go find your new puzzle. I think some people make careers at places that, even in a position that probably doesn't need to be a career position, but something that a lot of people use as a stepping stone. And obviously in a lot of companies, this seat really isn't a stepping stone. You're kind of at the top. But again, I think it's beautiful to me to hope for that day where I'm no longer needed because I've done so well here and helped change things to, again, to a way that I don't need to automate. I don't need to oversee it. It's automated. And I think that's an awesome thing to look forward to.
Yeah, definitely. So being in trucking in this industry, I'm sure that a lot of people listening, especially some college age students, if they are, right, this is not an industry that they probably envisioned themselves working into, and neither did you initially. So, but there is a lot of opportunity, right? There are office function everywhere, whether or not you're actually out there driving a truck, right? There is a office of people, a group of people that are supporting, right, the people that are on the road. So what would you share as maybe one, and if you have more misconceptions about the trucking industry and working in the trucking industry that you think can be quelled right now, that may encourage people to really explore whether it's an entry level role or a transition into the industry itself.
Yeah, the trucking industry is never going to go away. I even though we're trying to automate so much in life, you're never going to replace a human being behind the wheel of a vehicle. I don't care what kind of vehicle it is. And so I think that's a really pertinent thing. There's a lot of jobs that I think, unfortunately, in the near future, even a lot of jobs that a lot of colleges still have are going to become automated in the next 20 years or so. But trucking, again, it's never going to go anywhere. You're always going to need somebody to oversee and make sure vehicles are running compliantly. And again, the compliance doesn't just go with a sticker on the side and a DOT number. It's everything from making sure you have oil changes and your tire tread depths are appropriate, and the air pressures and tires. I mean, you can't automate stuff like that. You've got to have somebody there that's physically checking it or adding air to the tires and changing oil. And so the trucking industry is never going away. I know it's a lot of misconception too that I know I made the joke earlier, I tell a bunch of old men what to do every day, but there's a lot of young people in this industry. I've had the pleasure to meet a few of them at some other functions that I've went to, not necessarily in my role, but just in the industry in general, whether that's in a lower level, safety role or a lower level compliance role. So it's really cool to see that the industry is getting younger, but you also have to think when you're in an industry that is primarily dominated by an older group of people, they have to get younger at some point. And so there's a huge opportunity within the trucking industry, I think, not only for those who want to be drivers, but people that want to get into the safety and compliance role. I mean, you kind of hit it a nail on the head earlier. I didn't graduate college with this idea. My degree is in public relations and advertising, but I do a lot of public relations here. I run social media for the companies. It's actually three companies that I work for. So, I run their socials and, do all the paperwork side and safety compliance. And yeah, the industry is only going to get younger. It has to. And when you've got, your average age was in the 60s and 70s, you have to get younger at some point. You've got to get a younger crop of people. I follow a lot of people on social medias like TikTok and things, a lot of female truckers. So a lot of females are really making a push to come into the industry. I think that's been a huge stereotype for years and probably still is to a point that there's not a lot of women in the industry. And I've actually had the pleasure to meet some really great female drivers, at different truck shows and things. And it's incredible to hear their side of the story. We actually just had a lady in here a couple weeks ago. She does moving. That's what she does for people. And she takes, she hires a crew and they load up her truck and she drives it to the new house and somebody unloads it. But just hearing her stories, of, number one, what it's like to be a woman in the industry. But it's really cool that she's kind of got a smaller group of women truckers, and they stay in touch. And so that I think that's a little, you know, quirk of the industry that, they don't think women can be in this industry, but the other person who works in the office is a woman. And, though she is not driving a truck, she's in the trucking industry.
Yeah, and a very important and crucial part of the industry. All right, like I said, that those supportive roles do a lot to make sure not only the safety, but right, all the logistics. Right, that's part of your title. Right, making sure everything's running appropriately and everyone gets what they need, and that can be the big difference when you think of right the capitalistic America of we got to have this today. And if we don't, this could be a huge detriment to our bottom line or fulfilling another customer's orders, right? If those are some raw materials that they need in order to manufacture their product or move on to the next step in their supply chain. So, all right,
I've heard
definitely
some,
crucial.
I kind of want to hit on what you just said a little bit. I've heard some people say before that, you know, my product isn't as important because I'm only moving, what's called fertilizer. That's something that we move. What's only fertilizer? Well, But I don't like to look at the small picture. Yeah, you are correct. We're only moving, one product from point A to point B. However, if we didn't move that, then those don't get treated to be sent to farmers who produce the food that you're going to eat at your tables. So it's a huge vicious cyclical cycle. It's a prime example was COVID, when people panic buy things, and now you can't get product moved fast enough because we're scared that we're running out of toilet paper. I actually, little throw out to my social on my LinkedIn, I've wrote some little articles about my struggles in the trucking industry as a young professional, one of which I actually wrote about not panic buying. And that was a big one, even with what's going on in the Middle East. A lot of people want to panic buy. It doesn't matter what the product is. It could be back in our area, when people hear there's going to be 3 inches of snow, everybody panic runs to their local store and they buy toilet paper, bread, and milk. I don't know what you're going to do with bread, milk, and toilet paper in your house for a week, but whatever. But it's one of those big things. Don't panic buy, because you don't realize that how much you buy in a store not only affects the what's available left in that store for everybody else, but the time frame of which a truck's going to get back to deliver more. And when you panic buy, now every store needs to restock all of those products, and there's only so many trucks to go around. It doesn't matter if you're talking, little box trucks or big 53-foot dry vans. There's only so many to go around. So when we panic buy, everything falls down the line. And unfortunately, us as the consumers, we're the ones that get hit the worst with it, because other people, ourselves included, probably go out and panic buy things. So it's a cool process to see. But yeah, I just think it's amazing to see how everything is cyclical, and your product is important. So when people say, well, it's just this or it's just that, well, it's not just that. Yeah, you're right. You're just hauling one product, but it's what you're doing, how does that affect the grand scheme of things? I've looked at little jobs that we've done, that we've made driveways and walkways and things like that. Well, we just made a walking trail through a park. Yeah, that's all we did. But it's been seen by over 1 million people in less than a year. So, those are things. How do you affect, with your little bit of what you're doing, how do you affect the world, or your area? I said that's what I love to see. And I don't like hearing that, well, I just haul grain. Well, it's not just grain. Whether it's feed grain or if it's grain that's going to be go ground down into flour to make bread for people.
Yeah, and I think it's perfect to demonstrate like the downstream impact as well as the upstream impact when we think about, you talked about panic buying, like how that impacts you, right? You have an impact towards like the larger world and the consumer world, and what people need, right? Or what they perceive that they need in their day-to-day lives, right? However deep we want to get into that. But also what happens at the consumer level also has the upstream impact to you all. And okay, now we have to figure out how to fulfill this order that was not expected, right? And the suppliers have to fill this order and we have to make sure it gets there. But the suppliers can't find this amount, or they don't have this amount. They're not going to for an extra week, but everyone needs it in 2 days, right? To restock their shelves. It's
Yep.
just it's a unique mindset to have. And you see both sides of it, right? The impact you have and the impact it has on you. So no, I think that's a really great kind of discussion to have to help people understand, right, the reality of the supply chain and how our decisions have a significant impact on not just that day, but also 2, 3 weeks, a month from now, potentially. It's great. So let's get in here. We're kind of wrapping up a little bit. So, right, we've had the event, the wedding planning, the dispatcher. Now we're in a director role, looking again at compliance and logistics. Let's rewind back or go back into the past. Mark, early 20s, maybe early on in his career, what are some things, whether these is a bit of wisdom or a realization that you've had that you wish you knew, understand, or maybe took advantage of opportunities either while you were in college, as you were about to graduate college, or early in your career that you think would have helped serve you well now, right? Not that you don't regret, not that it's a regret for not doing it, but something that you wish you would have either paid attention to or been more engaged with.
Yeah, I think a big one for me, and I kind of hinted on it earlier, was I never asked questions. I just assumed, being when I was told something was to be done a certain way, I just did it. And so I think having a little more confidence to ask those why questions before I don't want to say given the opportunity to, but it's kind of what I mean. Not to be afraid to ask those questions. I don't know that anything really sticks out that was a kind of a missed opportunity. going through school that led me to this industry. I was a little tied down at a younger age. I met my wife at 15, so there were some things that came across that I probably could have done, but wanting to stay in the area and start a family kind of hindered that. But I think just being confident to ask questions is such a huge thing. I tell a lot of people, I'm a t-ball coach, and one of the things that the kids say, well, I can't do that. Well, you can't do it yet. You're learning. And so that's a big thing. It doesn't matter that everything that you're going to do, at 20, 22, 23 years old, you can't do everything right now that you're going to be able to do in 20 years. And so just have the confidence in yourself to ask those questions and figure out where you fit. Because even if you're going to school to be a doctor, when you get into the hospital, you're probably going to find out that maybe your specialty that you wanted to do is, a surgeon or something. That's not where you're going to be led to. And so ask those questions and have the confidence in yourself, to figure out what it is that you want to do and how you want to do it. I'm sure that if you brought 10 people that are in my role from 10 different companies, we probably all do it 10 different ways. And so it's okay to be your own person. So have the confidence to trust yourself, trust your instincts, and ask why a lot.
Yeah, I think that is incredible advice and very important, right? Because a lot of times I think when people enter their first role, right, entry level role in a new company, they are intimidated, right? And that's where that confidence comes in to be willing and have some level of confidence to ask not just the right questions, right? You can ask the wrong questions, but you're going to learn something. Right? It doesn't even matter if it's the exact right way to ask it, but you'll gain some level of insight, information, and knowledge along the way. And if you find that by asking questions it's off-putting, right? I think that's also telling, especially early in your career, that maybe this company may not be the best fit for you, right? The culture may not be receptive of people asking the whys and learning how to do things differently, right? You were fortunate in this case that you were empowered, right? But that may not always be the case. And if you are a question asker and somebody wants to understand how everything works, and you consistently meet resistance to that, right? That's also a telling outcome to being inquisitive.
Yeah, well, I think that's really important. One thing I tried to. I know my kids are young, but one thing I really try to instill in my daughter is, it's okay to fail. I know I said it earlier, but Thomas Edison's quote of not failing, he found 10,000 ways how not to do something. I think that's how everyone should view a career path. It has nothing to failure. It's failure if you quit. If you fail at something and then you stop, you're absolutely correct. You failed. But if you didn't do something the right way, and then you learn how to either do it the right way or do it in a way that makes sense for you, your company, your industry, it's not failure. It's just a learning experience. And I think that's super important. Culture to me is super important in a workplace. Like you said, it's great to feel empowered, and it is. So you need to not only love where you work, you need to love what you do. You need to feel empowered to work there. I've worked with people in my life that, work as a paycheck, and you shouldn't just view it as just a paycheck that comes in. You should get something from coming to work too. If you go home every day and you're miserable and you hate what you do, well, it's time to find a new job, and that's okay. It's not failure. It's just a learning experience that job, that industry, that company wasn't for you. It's okay to not be successful in everything that you're going to do through life. It's not a midlife crisis. It's not a crisis in your 20s. It's a learning experience, and you move on, and you just get better from it. I always, I tell my boss every day, I screw up every single day when I work here, but I didn't fail. I just didn't do something maybe that was the way that they thought it should be done, or somebody else thought it should be done, but I'm learning how to do it in those ways. I'm very new in this industry, regardless of how many years I've spent. I'm very new. I'm very young in the industry. And every single day you learn. I'm probably an anomaly. There's a compliance manual that's several thousand pages long. I've got it. I don't have it within reach, but and actually when I'm going through my audit, like I told the guy that was doing my audit, I said, I'm probably an anomaly, but I read the entire FMCSA compliance manual cover to cover. And that's what he was like, why? And I said, why not? Because that's how I learned a lot of the little things in the industry. Um, there's a lot of slang in the industry. I mean, those are things that you have to learn as well. And, some of that stuff's kind of laid out in manuals and things. So don't look a gift horse in the mouth. You're given a manual about your industry. Just sit down and read it. But yeah, I'm kind of getting off track. But no, just to, come back. I think what you said is really important. It's okay to fail. You don't have to be successful at every aspect at every time in your life. It's not failure. It's just a learning experience. Success comes with time, comes with experience, and so learning's okay. Failure's not. Learning's okay.
Indeed, indeed. There we go. That's some of the takeaway there. So recently I've been giving people opportunities that have taken time to chat with me, an opportunity to shout out some mentors or some people along the way that they think are, whether it's responsible for where you are or have given some nice tidbits or mentorship, whatever that may be. And this could be, people you've worked with. It can also be family members, right? Somebody you'd like to shout out that you think has helped you succeed to where you are today.
Yeah. I have a few that come to mind. I think as a lot of people do. Parents were a big one. It's important to have a support system, whether that's a friend, a family, doesn't matter. My wife has never told me no in anything I wanted to do, whether it was changing from wedding and events to the trucking industry. And my parents as well, super supportive. I think that's more personally supportive. Professionally, guy Chris, Pat Ford is a great mentor to me. I see him at least once a year. We catch up really well, and he really helped me on early on. He was one of those guys that really pushed me to ask questions, and so that was a really important piece that I took away from him. And then, truthfully, the owners of my company, so Dan and Rachel, have just been so empowering to me. To I don't want to say give me the reins, but that's really what they did. They give me the reins and the freedom and the confidence to fail, as a lot of people would call it, but not be 100% successful. And we'll figure it out together. Rachel is extremely successful in what she's doing. She has a boutique, and it's extremely successful. And just watching her and see how she's built what she has. She came from the healthcare industry. For those of you that are in that field, so it's okay to make a huge shift. But Dan had started this company. I believe it was 2004, 2005, somewhere around there. And he's expanded it to now three companies: so Briar Ridge Auto, which is the mechanical side; the legit Briar Ridge Logistics, which is our trucking side, and then he also owns Dig It Man Excavating, which is demolitions and excavation work. And Dan has been an amazing mentor to me as well. We have some really amazing talks, him and I, on how to do things better. And they're both just incredible people, and the support they give me, the confidence that they give me, it's important to have somebody like that in your life. I think it almost brings a tear to my eye to be able to work for people like that are that supportive of your journey and are empowering to you to be successful. They're really behind you, rooting for you, because obviously my success is the company's success, which in turn is their success. So it's really beneficial to work for a small company. And Dan and Rachel have been some amazing professional support people for me throughout my career, not only while working here, but I've actually known Dan longer than I've known his wife Rachel, and even at that time, Dan was really supportive of things that I was doing. And so it's incredible to have people like that in your life, and I hope that everybody that listens, yourself included, has some people like that you have in your life that can empower you to go to the next level and have the confidence to do it.
No, that's awesome, right? That's what I love about that. I haven't done this from the beginning, but I think it's really cool to hear people, provide that shout out to those that have been really just crucial and integral to their career journeys and people that they respect, right? And family members they love, and you even love the people you work with, especially if it's a great relationship. So, no, that's great. Any final parting words of wisdom, right? To anybody out there right now that is looking for that next step, is in a rut in their career, or just needs a little motivation. Anything you want to offer to those people?
I like the old adage that when you hit rock bottom, the only place to go is up. And I think it's really important that no matter where you're at in your career, what level you're at in leadership, to love your journey. Truthfully, it's everything that I've done up to this point, I've felt has pointed to be in this kind of position. And so nothing's failure. I hate when people, even my friends, talk about times in their career that they failed. I know I've said it a bunch, but it's not failure. It's just learning. When you quit and give up, then it's failure. But and it's okay to fail at something and find a new industry. But as long as you're pushing forward to better yourself, that's the most important thing. Always ask why, and failure is not an option. Just It's okay to not be successful right then, but just learn from it and move on. Don't linger on it. And the world, no matter what industry you're in, it moves fast. So the longer you sit on something and you stew on it, the further behind you get, and then the worse you feel. So bite and move on, and just live your best life.
To live your best life, win the day to the best of your ability, and don't let those failures, and not even those failures, but those bad days keep you down, because the next day can be the best day.
Sure.
All right. All right, Mark. Well, thanks for taking time to chat with me. Definitely, I'm sure there's some people out there that hopefully are thinking about, you know what the industry is for me? Trucking,
There
right?
you go. Give me
I
a
shared
call.
with you prior, my dad grew up and worked in trucking, was a truck driver. So I definitely understand, at least, from that side, right? The industry, the hours on the road. My dad did some longer haul, right, as well as being some local delivery. So there's definitely a lifestyle for people in the trucking industry, I know. So I appreciate you shedding some light on that, and, like you said, talking about some of those misconceptions. So thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate the time. The trucking industry is ever changing and ever adapting. So anybody should give it a go. If you don't want to drive a truck, come turn a wrench. If you don't want to do that, come sit in the office and push some paperwork with me. It's all good. There's something for everybody.
Indeed, there is. And everyone, make sure that you not only listen to this episode, which are at the end, so good thing you did, but make sure you tune into the next episode of Classroom to Corner Office Career Talks with Chris.